All right, we're live everywhere. I'll start. We have one who's going to join us, which is good here. And welcome everybody to our next feature in our Maze for Mystery Writer series. Today we have Matthew, aka Langdon Cost. He has been wanting to write since he was 8 years old. He's a writer of historical fiction and mystery books. He taught history and coached sports. And he owned a video store, a mystery bookstore, and a gym. Matt, welcome to a Free Thinkers Corner Maze for Mystery Writer series.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. Good to be here.
So you owned a gym. What was that like? What kind of gym?
Uh, uh, it was called the Cellar of Fitness and owned it for about 6 years before selling it. It still operates here in town, but it was a family business. I'd actually, my older brother and myself had first opened a video store, and that did amazingly well back in the time of video stores in the 90s. um, and so when my younger brother graduated from college, he had wanted to be involved in a gym. So along with him and my other brother's wife, we opened the Cellar of Fitness in the basement of a building and had 500 members at one point and ended up selling it. So it was a good experience, and I could go to work and work out at the same time. So that was nice.
There you go. There you go. So home for you is Brunswick, Maine.
Yep.
Have you lived there all your life?
Nope. I pretty much grew up in Maine, but upstate, up in Madison by Skowhegan. But I have been in Brunswick for 30 years now, so a good chunk of time.
Good chunk of time. Yep. Yeah. So what was it like running or owning your own mystery bookstore? Was it strictly just mystery books? Was it, or
We
did you have other stuff?
we broke the mold a little bit, but it was the idea was to carve out a mystery niche, and probably of all the businesses, that was the least successful. As you probably know, a bookstore is quite
Yeah.
difficult, and then if you're going to limit yourself to only mysteries, that
Right.
adds another burden. So I can't say we really got that up and going, but it did spur my mainly mystery series because the protagonist in that owns a mystery bookstore, which is the same name as the one I actually owned.
Ah. Ah. So what authors, what titles did you have? Everything from like Agatha Christie all the way through James Patterson, or
Yeah, no, we were very, very encompassing. So, that's if you're going to limit yourself to mysteries, so John Dunning and, Elmore Leonard and Carl Hyacin, who are some of my bigger influences, as well as some younger adult stuff like Hardy Boys and things like that.
oh, yeah, we have some of the old 1940s, 1950s vintage Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew
Yeah,
in the
do
store, and yeah, yeah, I remember growing up on those too.
hardcovers.
Yep, yep. So you taught history. What was your favorite part or historical time that you liked to teach, or did you were you specialized in the history that you taught?
I taught American history, and I would say that that was my ideal and what I would have liked to do if I had a choice, which I guess I did. So, um, time period in American history, I don't know. I bounce around a little bit. As you know, I write histories and mysteries,
Uh-huh.
and I wrote about the Civil War in a Joshua Chamberlain book, and I'm looking forward to in a little while perhaps starting a new historical mystery set in the 1920s, um, because that and in Brooklyn, because that time period and place fascinates me. But
Mhm.
in August, I have a book coming out in New Orleans after the Civil War, so I guess I would say I would bounce around from place to, a lot of intriguing things out
Yep.
there.
I do want to say real quick though, everybody on Facebook Live, please you can use the comment section for any questions or comments for Matt. And everybody here over on Zoom, if you just keep your microphones off, your video or muted, your videos off, and just use the chat bar down at the bottom, and we'll get those questions and comments to Matt. So back to the history thing. You like you had mentioned, you have well, actually, your first historical fiction, I believe it was, I Am Cuba, Fidel Castro, and the Cuban Revolution.
Uh, it all gets a little confusing, but I wrote I Am Cuba. The
Actually, that was your first traditionally published one. Your
Yes,
first one was self-pub. I have my arrows mixed up in my paper here. So we'll start with this one then. Joshua Chamberlain and the Civil War. So that was your very first novel, historical fiction that you self-published.
yes, I self-published that with Create Space on Amazon. Um, and it's back in the I guess I give a little history of why I did it. I was teaching history and I took a class on teaching biographies in the classroom. And it sort of got me excited to come back to historical fiction because one of the crossovers is I'd written a rough draft of I Am Cuba right out of college. So some 25 years later, or 20 years later, I decided to come back to historical fiction and write about Joshua Chamberlain, who's lived in my hometown of Brunswick, Maine, and his time during the Civil War because he was involved in so much. And that sort of stemmed out of this 2-week summer class I took on teaching biographies in the classroom.
How did you go about researching Joshua?
Um, you know, a lot can be found on the internet these days, but being in the hometown of Joshua Chamberlain, where Bowdoin College is as well, I was able to access those files that they had that might not be online, some of the more rare things. And visiting places was certainly important. As a matter of fact, I think that I went to Gettysburg to research his quintessential battle, that the turning point of the Civil War that he was involved in, so much that my son ended up going to Gettysburg College.
Hmm, okay. So obviously Joshua, who he is, where he lived, was from, Gettysburg. Those are the historical aspects of it. What was the fictional part of it? Just sort of the side conversations, some of the side characters.
I um, in that book, I focused on being very historically accurate. But what I did do was I told the story through the eyes of my protagonist, who was a fictional character. And as well, on top of that, to, flesh a book out and make it a real living, breathing thing, I think you do have to get into people's heads and their emotions and conversations to the best of your ability. And obviously, there was no audio recordings at the time, and it's impossible to actually be inside Joshua Chamberlain's head. But you can, from his writings, and reading about him, you can judge how he would feel when certain things happen.
Mhm.
Exchanges with his wives, or men killed under his command, or mistakes. And so I technically that is fictional, as is who the story is told by.
Now, you have wanted to write since you were 8 years old or so, according to your bio. Uh, did you do any writing as a kid, growing up in school or something?
Not so much, just short stories, sort of things, silly nonsense a little bit, but I think I kind of went off and got involved with sports for a while, and went off in college and got involved with college sort of things. But as I said, upon graduating from college, I decided to write a book,
Mhm.
a manuscript, which is the rough draft of I Am Cuba, which was my first serious foray into writing. And I realized it was horrible.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about I Am Cuba. You had sent us a reader's copy, which we were hoping to have you in last year to have an in-person thing, of course. Thank you, COVID, for squashing that. But I haven't had a chance to read it. but it was your first traditionally published book. So why did you go traditionally published with this one versus independent like the first one?
Well, the short answer is to that is because somebody would have me.
Okay.
So, I was able to come under contract with Encircle Publications, who read it, loved it, and agreed that they would publish it. So, getting a traditional publisher was definitely something that I
Mhm.
wanted to do.
After you had written the manuscript for it, you set it aside. You were working on the Joshua one. Were you still sending out letters and stuff for IM Cuba?
Um, like I said, 1990, 1991, I wrote this rough draft of I Am Cuba. And to tell you the truth, at the time I had, one of those old Mac desktop, computers, and it crashed
Oh,
and I lost the whole thing, but I had printed a copy of it. So I did have a printed out copy, but there was no salvaging it. So I'm like, okay, I should start, you know, typing it back into the computer and editing as I go. And as I did this, I truly realized a few things. And one was that I needed to do more research. And another was that I needed to improve my writing abilities because I was not very good at writing. And the final piece was that I really felt that I needed to visit Cuba. And until I got a chance to visit Cuba, um, I didn't feel like it was going to be sincere. Just the simplest things of the guerrillas, they're walking through the mountains and whatnot. And what's it like? What's the heat like? What's the terrain like? It was hard to be sincere. So over the years, I worked on my craft of writing. I continued researching. So there's probably, 30 years of research into I Am Cuba. And then finally in 2016, I got an opportunity to go to Cuba on a self-devised trip. I took my son along as my translator. I made sure to teach that he knew how to speak Spanish before we went, and developed a trip following the Revolutionary War trail of Fidel Castro, which that is what the book is about, is the actual revolution from 1953 to 1959. So we sort of followed in his footsteps and, learned many important things, such as how 300 bearded guerrillas were able to defeat an army of 10,000 because they were trying to flush them out of this, the mountains, that the terrain was just so horrendous and the heat was so bad that, you couldn't see 3 inches in front of you. So it was just prime for ambushes. And I got a better understanding for a lot of these things and what Cuba is about.
so what was that process like trying to get did you have to get permission to go over to Cuba, with all the tensions from decades and decades of tensions between the US and Cuba and stuff? What was that process like trying to get there, and then how exciting was it that you got to go?
I probably could have gone a few years earlier than I did because they started loosening up restrictions and people were allowed to go for research and various other things. But when I went in 2016, they kind of loosened it up all the way. That was the heyday before we
Mhm.
recently went back to tightening restrictions again. And so it was opened up entirely. It was a fascinating place. The people were so incredibly friendly, welcoming, wanting to talk. They're a very smart, literate group of people. They have free education in Cuba. They're very healthy because they've got great health care there. And they've struggled monetarily, but a lot of
Mhm.
a lot of the problem with that is because we've been trying to, you know, um, strangle them economically by putting a boycott on them.
Is it true that they have all those the old 1950s cars all over the place, and they just keep fixing them and fixing them?
Well, here's the funny thing. They do have those cars, but they don't keep fixing the engines. The engines didn't last very long. And so sometime in the 60s and 70s, they started replacing those big old muscle car engines with little Russian four bangers.
Nah.
So you're sitting there, in Havana, on the boulevard, and the cars are driving by, and every time they accelerate, it's like instead of the good old muscle car sounds.
Right,
So they
right.
look good, but they don't sound so good.
Now, I don't know if you smoke or not, but even if you don't, did you have a cigar?
We actually did have a cigar, and hopefully my son's not watching this, because we each had a cigar the first night there, and it sort of made him feel green and a little bit funny, and so therefore I don't think I had any more after that while I was there, but I'll occasionally have a cigar, but I I thought it would be unfair to him to smoke a cigar in front of him after it made him feel sick.
One thing I love about traveling is eating, especially in different countries and stuff. What was the food like?
Oh,
Must have been amazing.
it was absolutely horrible.
Really?
Yeah. No, the food was very poor. I don't know if there's fancier, wealthier places. We did a lot of homestays where we was, for
Okay.
the 2 weeks we were there, we were staying in houses, and I think they're all struggling to get by a little bit, but even eating out a little bit, I was not impressed with the food. Um, Actually came back with a little bit of food poisoning
Yeah.
that lasted for a little while.
So, what was one of the most fascinating or unexpected things you found while following in the footsteps in your research?
Absolutely. The number one thing I sort of mentioned already is going up into to Fidel Castro's command post high in the Sierra Maestra and the mountains, and just uh, it was a struggle just to hike up there, much less imagining carrying, weapons and this and that.
Mhm.
And I was there in December, and it was still 90 and more humid than I could ever even believe. And the foliage was so thick. So, that was pretty fantastic, just the mind blowing to me. And it gave me awareness of how they did it. But, many other things, understanding how Santiago works, because that was a large part of the battleground. The battle didn't really reach Havana until the very end of the revolution, and then it was already mostly over. So it was mostly down the Santiago end that the battles took place, and going to Santa Clara to see where Che Guevara led a huge victory that kind of turned the tides of the war was pretty fascinating, and the trains that were involved in that and whatnot.
So, once you had all that research and you had all your stuff, you must have taken tons of pictures.
Yeah.
And so then you got back and you started putting this together. Did it go pretty quickly, putting the book together at that point?
Um, yeah, I would say it went fairly quickly, finishing it up, because I'd been kind of preparing to do it for 25 years,
Mhm,
like I
mhm.
said. So I was ready to go and was able to finish it up and start peddling it around. I started, looking for agents and to go to a larger publishing house at first, but I had some interest, but nothing really worked its way out. And I decided to look at a smaller publishing house, and I sent it out to about 12 of them, and um, three of them got back to me and were interested, and I decided to go with Encircle Publications, which I'm very glad I did. It's been a great choice for me. So that's been nice.
Good, good. So you said you weren't good at writing. Did you take so in between that 30 years there where you had your manuscript and you finished the book, and then you also had the Joshua Chamberlain book in there? Did you take classes? Did you um, just classes, workshops, things like that, or
Yeah.
writers groups?
I never really joined any writers groups, but I did do workshops and some classes, and worked on writing shorter things and this and that. Uh,
Mhm.
Actually, a couple of my mysteries I wrote over that time period and didn't publish, either, because they were more just sample, practicing.
Mhm.
And I ended up going back to them after talking to Encircle Publications, and kind of really did some heavy editing of the two mysteries that I'd done at that time, and Encircle Publications published them for me.
Did they give a lot of feedback as far as what could be improved here and there?
Uh, Not so much. Um,
You had things pretty
uh,
well down by then as
uh,
far as your writing goes?
I had my writing down much better, but I also have an editor who I pay
Mm,
to do edits for me that I've worked with on several books now, and uh, we've developed a really good relationship, and I really love his suggestions, which are often, just like, this scene needs a little touching up, work on it. And, then it's just up to me to come up with what to do, but it's worked out well for me.
So your first mystery series is the Mainly Mystery series. So you have Mainly Power, Mainly um, Fear, and Mainly Money. And of course, they're all spelled Maine, as in the state, Ly. They all take place in Brunswick, Maine. What got you to use Brunswick versus a uh, fictitious place?
Like I said, I'd written the first two, Mainly Power and Mainly Fear, rough drafts of them some years ago. And probably it might have been a small mistake to have done because it comes with a lot of headaches. And, I changed, I don't use real people, and I changed the names of businesses, but you could still recognize them a little bit. And it just, that's why and we'll talk about it more in the Clay Wolfe Port Essex series, I've decided to go to a fictional town.
Mhm.
But, so using the town might have created more headaches, but as alluded to earlier, I based it around a mystery bookstore, and the protagonist always wanted to own a mystery bookstore and be a private investigator. And, and so luckily, because of his crazy aunt Zelda, who leaves him a small inheritance, he's able to do this. And between the two things that don't pay very well, is able to complement it. And I actually own the mystery bookstore in the town of Brunswick that I use in this, called the Coffee Dog Bookstore. And so that's the only real place in the book. And then the dog, who the bookstore is named after, was actually my dog as well, the coffee dog.
Ah,
So he's the only real character, and the bookstore is the only real bookstore.
well, being a bookstore owner yourself and having a bookstore owner slant detective, is there a little bit of you uh, in that character?
I would say there's a little bit of me, but it's certainly not all of me. There's probably half of me in it, and then a amalgamation of many other people.
Yeah. So tell us about the books. How does what's Mainly Power about, or what's the whole series about, other than the bookstore and the detective?
Mainly Power, which, by the way, was just selected or recommended by Jerry Boyle and selected by the Maine Humanity Council as the Read Maine Book of the Year. Read Me, capital ME. And the libraries throughout Maine are all uh, promoting that book to their patrons, and in an effort to get them discussing the book. So reading a common book and then discussing it amongst themselves. Um, so I was excited for that. And that book, Mainly Power, is about a problem at a local nuclear power plant. I don't know if you remember back to nuclear power plants when they were all over the place, but we
Oh
had one
yes.
here in Wiscasset called Maine Yankee. And of course, I changed the name and changed the town name and throw in a few problems. And you've got environmentalists and wealthy landowners and uh, a whole host of people that might want to shut this power plant down or keep it open or cover up certain things that are happening there. And that's kind of the mystery after the head of security is found dead. And so, what is going on at this nuclear power plant? One of the things that I realized at that time is that there's really no security at nuclear power plants. So this incredibly dangerous place, people can just walk in. You know, the one in Wiscasset was set on the water, and you know, I talked to clammers who'd say, yeah, you know, we go clamming in the flats there, and we're 10 feet from the reactor.
Jeez.
So
Yeah. I remember back in the mid to late 70s, my father was in the Marine Reserves, and he had to go to the Seabrook power plant and do some guarding because there was a lot of unrest, I guess, about nuclear power plants and stuff during that time. I was 6, 7, 8 years old or so, so I
yeah,
remember
they just had a crisis in New York, right? The 3 Mile Isle crisis around then. So maybe they were more secure at that point.
that might have been it. Yeah, I remember him coming home every few days, and he brought me a baseball glove one time, and he got me something else another time. But yeah, I remember there was something back then, so maybe that was it. Um, so one thing I just noticed was that your detective, his name is Jeff Langdon. Now,
Goff is how I pronounce it. Goff Langdon.
Goff Langdon. Okay. Oh well, yeah. I guess there's no E. I really need new glasses. I need glasses. Period. So Goff Langdon. So you named him after you? Your your middle
You
name?
know, another one of those things, sort of like, you know, writing about the town I lived in,
Yeah.
using my middle name as my protagonist's last name. These are, you know, early on mistakes that I probably should have changed at some point, but now we have it. We're sticking with it. You know,
Right.
it
That's
created
always
some complications.
that was always one thing I wondered, and I'm surprised that I'm just asking it now. But how do writers come up with names? How did you decide? Well, you took this was obvious, sort of obvious, the Langdon part, but even for your new series, how did you decide what the names are going to be?
Well, you know, in those early mainly mystery books, which I keep the characters, so they come up to current day with the same names. But many of the names are very odd in that book. I have a woman named Shabal. I have a man named Richam. I and these were the result of my 2-year-old daughter playing with her toys and butchering real names. And so she would call the man Richam. And I said, that'd be a neat name for somebody's
Okay.
book. So that's actually how I came up with some of the names in that. Um, but you know, more currently with my writing, I will troll through you know, names, just looking for something that sort of fits. Actually, recently I just wrote my fourth mainly mystery, and it'll be coming out next January, called Mainly Angst. But one of the antagonists, I had given one name throughout the entire book, but every time I thought of him, I was calling him something different in my mind. I kept thinking of him as Martin instead of Jack. So I finally had to go change it to Martin because he obviously must have been a Martin. So I went through and changed every Jack to Martin.
Now, I have noticed that you have a lot of books that have come out fairly close together, and you have more coming out very soon. How long does it usually take you now to from your very first book? It took you 30 years to write the the Cuba one.
Things are going quicker.
I think seems to be going a lot quicker. How long does it take to go from the first note on the paper to giving it to your editor?
You know, it's different between the histories and the mysteries. You know, there's a lot of research that goes into the histories, and it's a little tough to tell, as you said, because it took me 30 years to do AM CUBA. It took me 6 years to do the Joshua Chamberlain, but I was teaching school and had 4 kids in their teenage years and coaching every sport imaginable as well. So it was a little difficult to tell. Um, it took me almost a year to write the book that I have coming out in August, which is Love in a Time of Hate, which is based in New Orleans after the Civil War, and it's really about the fight for social equality and freedom and justice at that time period. Um, but the mysteries certainly can go faster. Um, so I've pumped out 7, and I'm on my 8th mystery in the last 2 years. So I'm writing a book about every 3 months.
What do they average, about 50, 60,000 words or so?
I that they're almost all in the 85 to 90,000 words.
Oh, well, that's good then. It's good.
Yeah,
And then,
that's a mark of what I my research dictates is the appropriate length. So that's what I
mhm.
strive for.
And then after that, by the time it gets to you do the editing, your editor does the editing, you get it to Encircle, they do their part. A few months more, or does that part go pretty quickly?
Um, from the time I get it to Encircle,
Yeah, so you're done writing, you've done your editing, and then you give it to your editor that you say
yep.
you have. Um, when you get to that point, so your editor, you make any corrections, then it goes to Encircle, or that whole process after you've done your editing. Does it go pretty quickly after that, or does it still take a little time?
Um, my editor does 3 passes on the work that I do. And the first pass requires a lot of work from me. The next 2 passes are really just okaying, some smaller changes. But, at that point, I'm writing another book. And when he brings me edits to work on, I'll kind of do both and I'll be writing a new book and do my edits. And the same thing happens is, I will be sending off June 1st to my publisher this fourth mainly mystery, and it'll be coming out in January. So it'll be about 6 or 7 months for them to
Yeah.
uh, edit. But then there's, the setting up of the book and creating the book cover and a lot of these other things as well. So
So what was I gonna say? Um, oh, do you have, so you're finishing up, or you're getting halfway through, almost at the end of the book? Do you start another book? Do you have multiple books going on at the same time for the different series, or do you have to do one at a time, get that off to your editor, and then before you start your next one while that process is going?
I don't write creatively different books at the same time. So, I will, you know, finish a manuscript of 80 to 90,000 words and send it off to my editor. And I might take a day or two, but then you generally start writing a new book. And like I said, when he brings that, sends me things back, I'll do the changes and fixes and additions while I am also writing this new book. But I will edit, uh, you know, and if you're bringing out 4 books a year, you're always writing, editing, and promoting a
Mhm.
different book. So,
And
the book that comes out, you're promoting,
right.
or the book that's about to come out, you're promoting, and the book that just came out, you're marketing, and you're editing one and you're writing another. So it's a lot of different hats there, but it's kind of fun to do.
And do you flip between the different series, or do you stick with one series until you're done? And I have an idea, but I want to switch to this one and do a book or two or three on the new series.
I'd written the 3 mainly mysteries that we talked about, mainly power, mainly fear, and mainly money. And that at that point, I decided I wanted to try a new series and perhaps use a fictional town and maybe a character that didn't have my name.
Mhm.
And and I kind of knocked off 3 in a row of that. And then I came back and after that and wrote a fourth mainly mystery just recently. And the one I'm working on right now will be a fourth Clay Wolfe Port Essex mystery. And I think after that, I'm going to change things up a little bit into something that might become a series, but it's going to be a detective in 1920s Brooklyn.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know if that'll be one. We'll have to see how it goes and see if it has a shelf life to continue on or if it's just a one and done.
Now, did you plan on the mainly main mysteries to be a series, or was it just a one, but then it turned out to be, oh, let's do another one, then let's do another one, then let's do another one?
Yeah, I don't think I had any real plans at the beginning as to, it wasn't like I was closed to the idea, but So it's just kind of like, well, let's write this, let's take it one step at a time and see where we're at. So,
Mm.
but it became obvious to me that, it was made for a series and would be good that way. A lot of colorful characters, and my readers have grown to like Gough Langdon and the other main characters in the book that are his friends and peer group.
Mhm. Are you able to, and this goes for your the Clay Wolfe series as well, are they sort of standalone books? Can you start with Mainly Money, or do you have to start with Wolf Trap and go in order?
Um, they can certainly be read standalone, but if you're going to read them all, it makes more sense to read them in order. Relationships come and change a little bit, and this and that, and you know. So if you read one book, you're not going to understand that you might have missed something from the first book. So it doesn't really harm starting on the second book, but you would gain more if you had read the first book because you'll have known the backstory of some of these characters a little bit more. But there's no, it's not to be continued.
Yeah. Well, one of the things with series is you always really good series, TV, movie, books, is seeing the growth of the protagonist. So you got Goff, sometimes backsliding, sometimes in one book, but then definitely growing off of that in the next books. Do you have that going on? And so that would be a good reason to start with the first one and go.
Yeah, no, I think there's actually a lot of growth. And there's another oddity to the mainly mystery series is because I wrote, the first two rough drafts some 20 years ago. When I decided to continue on with the third one a few years back or a year back, I decided to pass that time over. So he went from being, 30 years old to 50 years old. So there's a little gap in there, and that's sort of interesting. But there's definitely been a lot of growth into that third book as he's matured and settled down and, figured life out a little bit better. And his daughter's grown up. And so there's definitely a lot of those things.
Have you ever thought about doing a little a novella like a mainly port 2.5 type of thing?
Um,
Just to kind of
no,
fill in that gap, and it doesn't even have to be a mystery story, just sort of a that where that growth, whatever kind of happened.
I don't know that I would do a novella. I'm not sure that I'm well suited for writing a shorter piece like that, but I wouldn't uh, cross out the having a 2.5 full length book. So I might go back and fill some of those gaps in at some point. I could see myself doing that. That would be sort of an interesting challenge, but maybe not right off.
We have I interviewed a wonderful author during the February the fantasy romance February events that we did, and that's what she did. She has at least 7 or 8 different series, but within those series, she even has this chart on her website. You click on each series, and it shows the book covers, and then has the offshoot, so 3.5 and book 4, book 5, book 5.5, and they're most of them are actual novels, and a couple of them are novellas. But I thought that was kind of a neat idea. So it fills in some, I guess, some gaps.
No, absolutely. Actually, one of the most very interesting thing I just did is I just submitted a short story. My publisher is going to put together an anthology of short stories, and I'm having a short story murder mystery of 5,000 words in which the main characters of my mainly mystery series, Gough, Langdon, and Chabal, are going to meet the main characters of my Port Essex mystery series, Clay Wolfe and Bailey Baker, and they're going to solve a crime together. So,
Nice.
so I'm kind of crossing over
Like a
the two series.
Yeah, yeah. I like that every once in a while on like TV shows, they do the crossover where you have the usual separate back-to-back shows, but they do a 2 hour crossover thing. That's cool. So your new books, So let's talk about the Clay Wolfe Port Essex one. You mentioned Port Essex is a fictional town. How'd you come up with the idea for that? And uh, describe it.
Uh, it's sort of fascinating. I've created an entire map of Port Essex, so as I create this place, it's sort of like a game where you're building a town. So I've got this large, cardboard cutout that I've outlined my fictional town on the coast, and as I add places, I fill them in on the map so that I can stay true to them. They often go to the Pelican Perch or the Seal Bar or where the Port Register daily is located. And so creating that map was kind of an exciting thing to do, to create this scene. I've loosely based the town on a real town, but it is loosely based. And so creating that was sort of fun.
So it wasn't one then the other. It was kind of hand in hand as you created it in your outline or in your text. You also put it on the map.
Right, right. So, I I realized partway into the first book that I needed a map. And so I made that and then I started adding to it.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of grown over the course of three, and now the fourth book underway with
Right.
places being added all the time. So
I spoke with one author who does back in the December for our horror writers thing, and she's a map drawer as well. That's kind of a side gig that she does, and she has all her maps from her books on her website as well. You ever think of doing? Maybe it is, and I just didn't notice it. But did you ever think of putting the map as a feature on your website?
I would consider hiring somebody to make my map look better and then putting it on the website. But uh, I've got it sketched out and I've got my places and on there and all, but I'm not really an artist in that way.
So you got so coming out in June, you've got your first Clay Wolf called Wolf Trap, and then it's followed by in December by Mind Trap, and then Mouse Trap. I'm catching a theme here. And next March in 2022. What was the idea behind the? Well, first of all, let's start with Clay Wolf. Who is he? What does he do? What's his story?
Uh, Clay Wolfe grows up in this small coastal town of Port Essex, uh, which is a summer destination for people. So, it's a mix of very, kind of middle class to poor fishermen, lobstermen, village, kind of rough and tough. And then for the months of July and August, the incredibly wealthy come to town and they all live out on the point. And so there's this kind of mix of these two factions of people. And this is where Clay Wolfe grows up. And as a matter of fact, at a very young age, he's orphaned when his father and mother die in a car crash along with his grandmother. And so his grandpops, Gene Wolfe, is going to raise him from age 8 on. Um, and he'll uh, go through school and, be the sports hero. And he decides he wants to be a detective, to a homicide detective. He wants to work for the police and works his way through college and becomes a homicide detective in Boston, and then becomes sort of jaded and cynical by the whole process. And that kind of coincides with his grandpops growing older, falling down, hurting himself. And so Clay Wolfe decides to leave the homicide department and go move back home to the small town of Port Essex and help take care of his grandpops. He lives in an efficiency apartment above the garage next to his grandpop's house. And what he knows is, being a cop. So he becomes a private investigator. And for a while, things are pretty slow as he just investigates insurance frauds and, and faked injuries on the workplace and things like that. And he's kind of happy enough with that. And that's pretty much where Wolf Trap is going to start out.
How does he differ from Goff Langdon? And then part B, how do you keep them from getting? How do you keep from getting confused when writing the story, or do you just immerse yourself in? Or your mindset is this is this series, this is this series.
Well, we'll answer part B first. Sometimes when I'm editing one and writing another, it does become difficult. And I have caught myself saying, Langdon said when it should be Clay said or something like that. So sometimes there is a little confusion there, but not so much, usually I can slot it accordingly. So how they differ, okay. Clay, Goff Langdon is very much an amateur PI. He doesn't have a lot of skills. He, gets his PI license, but he doesn't have a background in law enforcement or anything like that. He's a very easygoing, tall, rumpled, wears Hawaiian shirts and, never combs his hair sort of guy. Just a real casual, laid back slacker sort of detective, bookstore owner, enjoying life as he kind of rolls along. And I guess, you could sort of think almost the dude in the Big Lebowski or something. But whereas Clay Wolfe does create this background, goes to college to become a police officer and does become a homicide detective and has this background. And he's fairly dapper and well dressed and likes to look good. So he's got the skills of a real PI, and it's not such an amateur thing. So it's stepping up to a more of a thriller almost than a mystery with a PI that can engage with the antagonists on a higher level.
Now, are your characters detailed like that in the book, and so somebody can get a real good picture, or do you leave it more um, up to the person's imagination to kind of fill in just enough to get a basic idea of what their characters look like, and let the reader fill in the rest?
I mean, I think I probably detail it over the course of the book pretty well. Um, and to tell you the truth, I think a lot of who a person is as a person is going to come out over the course of the book, as opposed to, you know, front loading it all and saying, you know, this is Goff Langdon and, he believes in the environment and, this and this. But rather, I would rather let those things leak out throughout his actions and thoughts over the course of the book so that, it grows with you as the book grows.
Mhm. Now, when you wrote your characters, did you have because you did mention that some of your characters are based on the people that you know in your town. Um, did you have any particular say? Well, like you had mentioned, Lebowski. Did you have a particular person in mind, a famous person or something that I'd like to kind of model up their appearance after this particular actor or actress or friend or relative?
Um, One of the things I generally do is, I'll come up with a character, I'll think of what they look like and whatnot, and then I'll kind of troll through images looking for somebody that fits that. And then I'll, copy and paste that into a document so that I can refer to it. I actually have a whole bunch of them up on the board right behind the computer here of some of my characters. Goff Langdon may or may not look like Bill Pullman, the actor. So, a lot of those, I do use those and then kind of reference that helps keeps the image fresh in my mind.
Have you ever gotten any comments from your followers, from your readers, saying, "Oh, you modeled this after so and so," or "This is who I thought
I
it"?
have got those comments, but I really haven't modeled anybody after anybody. I've used pieces of people, but
Right.
no more than pieces of them into any one character. But people will often try and guess. I guess a little more straight up is I used real Brunswick institutions and just changed the name.
Mhm.
So, just recently I read a review of my I think it was Mainly Money that somebody had wrote on NetGalley. And they were talking about how they used to live in Brunswick, and it was fun to read all these places and how they knew that the wretched lobster was actually the old barking spider. Sort of the names it changes, and they were kind of going on about trying to, Fat Boys Drive-In is in my book becomes Hog Heaven. So people have had fun kind of figuring those things out, but so more places than people, I think.
How'd you come up with the names for the places?
You know, I I tried to stick close to the nature of what it really was. If it's Fat Boys, I said, let's call it Hog Heaven.
Okay.
So I kept it close, and
Mhm.
just tried to come up with something that kind of fit the image of what that place had been, but without calling it that.
We have one author, you may know him, Jeff Deck. He lives right over in South Berwick, Maine, but his series takes place down in downtown Portsmouth, and it is comforting to be able to read and recognize some of the streets. And we have some others that are like placed in Boston. I'm not too familiar with Boston, but enough to know where some of the streets are, some of the building names and stuff like that. So yeah, there is something to reading about a place that you are living in or lived in. Um, when you when you edit your books, do you ever find yourself that you sort of backed yourself into a corner, or that it doesn't jive with a previous chapter or a previous paragraph, and you had to go back and rewrite something?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
what was
absolutely. You know,
what was the biggest thing that you had to do? Was it like a whole just a paragraph, a couple sentences, or was that a whole entire chapter you had to rewrite?
and I wouldn't say that I've backed myself into a corner, but I would say that, I find like there's a missing piece and I need a new character. And if you're going to go back and introduce a new character or enlarge upon a character, that's going to have implications on almost every page. So it's not just the scenes within which they are, but it's
Right.
the things they did and the impact it has on the rest of the book. So that can be quite encompassing to, you know, I've gone so far as to get to the end and realize that who I thought was the villain was not the villain. And, and then I have to go back and, who the villain is and feed in a few clues and tidbits that, will make sense to the reader. So when they get to the end, they'll say, oh, yeah, this, and this. But, if they weren't the villain to begin with, that backstory wasn't really in there.
You had mentioned that when you started writing, you were working on a Macintosh and stuff. How do you keep track now of things like that? Who done it, backstories, things like that? Do you use a computer program like Scrivener, or do you use Word? Do you use notes, handwritten notes, files?
I just use a Word document and I create an outline after the fact. So, some people might create an outline and then write from that.
Mhm.
I generally will, and sometimes I'll fill into that outline things that are coming as I think of them. But for the most part, I'll write a chapter and then I'll go in and put, three or four significant things that happened in that chapter so that I can reference back to them and know that this is when, this person did this and when this person did that. And it becomes complicated in series as you go because you have to keep all these backstories and characters in line. And sometimes a person, in Wolf Trap, this probably gives away a little bit, but Clay Wolfe is hired to find who was dealing the drugs that killed this lady's grandbaby, and she was going to be a very minor character. And then suddenly in book two, she's hired by Clay Wolfe to work in his PI business, and she becomes a major character. So, and so it's nice to have outlines of these things so that you can keep it all straight and not make mistakes.
Mhm. So have you ever had a character, or do you have characters that you like her? She's a minor character, but now she's becoming a major character, and may continue on. Are there characters that you had as major characters, but they just personally they just didn't turn out the way you wanted to, so you kind of want to get rid of them, kind of kill them, I guess, kill them off at some point, but you kind of can't because they're a major part of the story.
I don't really think so. I don't think that, you know, I have killed some very important people, and I think it's much more impactful if they are significant and do make a difference. So I don't think it would be as efficient to kill somebody if they were losing importance. Um, but, you know, I think that perhaps I know in both of my series that some of the characters have a bigger role than others other times, and they're relied upon more. And but that doesn't mean that the next book somebody else isn't going to have a larger role.
Mhm.
So it just
Have you
ebbs
ever
and flows.
outlined a particular character, and as you're writing that character and that character in the story or their story itself, you really like them, but you know based on your outline that they're one of the ones that has to go. Um, how did you feel about that when you got to that point?
Did I ever give anybody a reprieve? Is that what you're asking?
Well, either give a reprieve
I
or
sent the
just
governor's
feel
message to death row.
right, or just felt really bad because you wrote this great character, but your outline shows and your notes show that this person is done at this point. Um, and you kind of you felt bad doing it, but or you gave him a reprieve.
In my first book, I uh, killed a character who was a very much loved character. And I have taken a lot of grief for it. And I'm not quite sure if that is a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, the fact that this had such an impact on my readers
Mhm.
is kind of cool.
Yeah.
But, perhaps I shouldn't have killed her because she was so well liked and she could have continued on and developed through, subsequent books. So yeah, it's a tough one to tell.
So when you sit down to write, do you have a particular time of day that you do that? Certain rituals? We have, I've talked to some who has to get a cup of coffee or a cup of tea before they write. One of them is very spiritual, so she kind of bangs a little tiny gong just to kind of get her mindset going. Some go take a walk and come back. Do you have a ritual or just a particular time of day that you like to routine? I guess is the word.
Um, you know, I get up every morning and I write. Every single morning, I'll get a cup of coffee and drink that while I look at the paper and news, and then I'll move to my desk and I write every single day. Um, some days I'll be able to, and I'll usually do that till 11 o'clock. So maybe from 7 to 11. And then some days I'll come back and write in the afternoon as well. But, often there might be some editing or marketing or other things to do later on. But I find that if I get up every single day and write, then it gets done.
So when you read the news before you get started, do you ever find some inspiration from whatever you're reading? And oh, that would be great in this part of the book.
Oh, absolutely. I'll look at the little blurbs in the newspaper all the time because that's where some of the best things come from. But, it was the newspaper, that gave me the idea of the Clay Wolfe book, the first Wolf Trap, where, this little girl dies because her mother rubs the residue from the heroin baggie on her gums to stop her from teething. And that was a real story that I read in the newspaper that happened here in Maine. And that was, the whole concept that grew into the book Wolf Trap.
What are some of the other influences, both in why you're writing mysteries and the stories that you've written, books or movies? What are some of the other influences?
I started off with the Hardy Boys. I was telling you earlier, and Encyclopedia Brown and some of those
Uh,
things, and just always really enjoyed those. I enjoyed Nancy Drew books, and so those are kind of the starting influences on me for sure. And it grew into actually just recently there was a reviewer that compared me to Carl Hyacin, Elmore Leonard, and John Sanford. And I couldn't think of a, a better thing to be compared to than those three authors who I've tried to emulate with a lot of my writing, especially Hyacin and Leonard, who, influenced me certainly heavily in the 90s, as did Robert Parker and some others. But as I told you, I'd kind of gone the historical route, and I was attending some historical conferences, and I just wasn't really feeling it. And then I went to some, I decided maybe I'd try mysteries. So I attended Crime Wave in Portland, and then Crime Bake down in Massachusetts, and Thriller Fest in New York City. And I just realized that they were my people. So everybody I talked to, I got along with. It was just, I felt an affinity with people that write mysteries, and that kind of just solidified it that it was time to come back to writing mysteries, and that's what I wanted to do. And now I'm thinking perhaps I'd like to balance it and write histories and mysteries. So that's the way I'm going.
so pre-COVID, did you do a lot of conventions where you had a booth set up with your books, or did you mostly just do like the Crime Bake and be a participant or a guest?
I, I was a guest at those. When Joshua Chamberlain came out, and I was self-published it, I kind of went on a circuit, and I did about 75 different presentations where I, sell the books and sign them afterwards and this and that, and did, fairs and things like that. Uh, but to tell you the truth, my first traditionally published book is I Am Cuba, which came out 4 days after the pandemic struck.
Right, right.
So I've had, three more books come out since then, but they all four books fall within the pandemic. As a matter of fact, I had big plans for I Am Cuba because Brunswick, Maine has a sister city in Cuba. And because of that, we have a Cuba week here where all sorts of events happen. And that was happening in the middle of last March. And I was going to be a featured, guest at it and give a presentation on my book that had just been released. And I'd bought 100 stress balls that I was going to give out to people that said I Am Cuba on it.
Hmm.
Too bad that probably would have, been very helpful to a lot of people over the last year, you think?
Well, you had reached out to us with your book. You sent us a copy, and I think it was maybe June, I think it was, or July. We were supposed to have you in the
Yeah, sure.
store
Yeah.
for it, and then we pushed it back to September, thinking that maybe things would get better because some were saying it was going to get better, but we all saw the writing. Most of us, I should say, saw the writing on the wall. But so yeah, we tried for September. Of course, that didn't happen. But um, how has other than that, how has COVID changed your writing? Has it affected your writing, or just sort of affected your routine of writing? Or
You know, I mean, it really hasn't affected my writing or my routine because, I don't have to go anywhere to write. And I hadn't been doing that for a few years, so I get up and I get my cup of coffee, and, I sit down at the computer, and probably pre-COVID times, I was in my pajamas till 11 o'clock as everybody is in COVID times. So, it hasn't affected, my writing routine at all. Like, the fourth mainly mystery that I was telling you I've just completed, and I'm on just about ready to send it off to the publisher. I'm on the final edits of it. Is called Mainly Angst, and it didn't start out this way, but it grew into the angst created by COVID
Mm.
between, maskers and anti-maskers and things like that. And, everybody sort of suggested that you shouldn't write something like that because nobody wants to hear it. But
That was going to be my next question. Do you think it's maybe too soon for something like that, or do you think it's just still something that should be talked about? Or
I think you can't ignore the elephant in the room.
Mhm.
So you know, as I said, because I asked some people and everybody seemed to think that nobody wanted to read a COVID thing, but I wanted to recognize that COVID existed. So I was kind of having the maskers and it was going to be about something different. And then it just evolved that it had to be about all this angst that is going on because that is the story. And so I guess I'm hoping that by next January, when it comes out, that people have loosened up a little bit about it, and I don't get any death threats.
Right, right. So what are some of the things, some of the ways you had to change your, so everything's edited, the book's out. What are some of the things that you did before the lockdowns and stuff to market, and how is that different the way you market stuff today or at this time?
Um, there's certainly good and bad with it all. It's really a fantastic thing to go do a book talk and have 30 or 40 people show up and be involved and ask questions and buy some books and be interested. And those are things that I've done in the past, and I had lined up quite a few of those events last year for AM CUBA that all got canceled. I got one in before everything fell apart, um, there's been a lot of really neat things that have happened as well. I've grown very close with some other in circle authors as we work together to market and promote our work. And Zoom has allowed us to do that. There's one other in Maine, but one woman's in Massachusetts and one woman's in Vermont. And the four of us are able to every Tuesday get together and with the publisher and talk about marketing strategies and this and that. And I've become good friends with them, even though I've never met them in real person. Um, and my publisher has fun, and we have a happy hour cocktail party on Thursdays with all the authors that have been published with them. Welcome to come in and join in at the discussion, and that's been fun as well. And there's people from Florida or California that if my aunt or uncle wanted to see my presentation and hadn't got tired of me talking about my craft, they could just get on Zoom
Right.
and be here. So some of those things are very good.
Yeah, I was gonna say Zoom has definitely been, if there is one, a silver lining to this whole thing, because I've been able to interview authors from Pennsylvania, um, Virginia, I think it was. I think I have a couple more coming up that are Kentucky or Tennessee, something like that. So these
That's
are
great.
probably people that I would never get to know, and maybe not even get their books in the store, or know about their books. So yeah, it definitely has been a small benefit too.
Yeah.
You know, and
I think people like to go out to events, so people that are going to attend events would, they're a little bit zoomed out for the most part. And I'm now, competing when I do a presentation against everybody in the world,
yeah.
competing against Stephen King. And it's pretty even, but I think he's got an edge on me.
Have you ever met Stephen King?
I have not. I saw him once down in Lovell from a distance, but I've never met him.
So your next one, you had mentioned that another book that's coming out is Love in a Time of Hate, New Orleans during Reconstruction. So this is going to be a historical fiction. It comes up in September 1st of this year.
It actually
Um,
got changed. It's August 25th. So,
oh, okay.
but
All right. So
I,
it's a historical murder mystery, engages in the fight for freedom and equality after the Civil War, which you had mentioned. You want to tell us a little bit more about it, or without spoilers?
uh, well, actually, it could almost be considered a series because the protagonist that I talked about in my Joshua Chamberlain book, who is a fictional character, Emmett Collins, and it's through his eyes that we see Joshua Chamberlain in the 20th Maine Regiment. I've got my Joshua Chamberlain shirt on, right there.
Ah,
Uh, it's through his eyes that we learn about Joshua Chamberlain in the Civil War. And in this book, Love in a Time of Hate, Emmett Collins has now continued on to New Orleans as part of the Freedmen Bureau. And he's working towards, kind of creating this new world order where Black people and white people are equal, and providing education for, former slaves that have had no opportunity at education, and any one of a host of things. And over time, that when the Freedmen Bureau falls apart, he's going to become part of uh, the local police force. And in doing so, he's going to be tasked with finding um, this person who is killing Black prostitutes in New Orleans, known as the Black Dot Killer. And so that's the murder mystery piece of it. He's also going to fall in love, and there's a romance tied through the middle of it. But the overall real theme of it is this kind of grittiness and darkness, because there is this opposition to against allowing social equality and freedom for the recently released Black slaves. And so um, it, it's definitely, a love story in a time of hate.
mhm. Now, how dark do your books get? As far as, or dark, or graphic, as far as some of the deaths, killing scenes, and or um,
I don't feel that my mysteries are overly graphic, or my Joshua Chamberlain book. I will allude a bit more to a sex scene or violence, but it's not painted too grisly.
mhm,
I do have to admit that the New Orleans book, I felt like I did have to be kind of graphic and blunt, and because I think the time and place and situation demanded it, that it couldn't just be glossed over and said, I, I wanted the readers to really kind of feel the pain of it.
it kind of almost sounds like it'd be like kind of like Caleb Carr's The
Yeah,
Alienist.
yeah, it's not that far from the Alienist. He's perhaps a little more sophisticated than Emmett Collins, the young Irish boy grown into a man from Maine,
Mhm.
who's now suddenly, on the front lines of, the fight for social equality between recently freed slaves and, basically white supremacists who don't want to allow their world to change in that way.
Right. So, did you, while you were writing these scenes, um, and then you went back and to read them, to edit them, did you ever find a point where you said, "Okay, that's just a little too graphic, a little too dark," and pull back, or the opposite? Maybe I could add a little bit more detail, or something into this.
I certainly did both. I removed some things, uh, more that not graphic, but just things that are no longer socially acceptable, even though they were accurate and real for the time. But to not offend people, I removed some things. But in other cases, I did, say, this person who's doing this is really a terrible person. And I want the reader to feel that.
Mhm.
So a few times I torqued up the awful things that this person did on purpose to make the reader feel how painful it was.
Now, did you yourself hire, or does Encircle Publications have, I guess it's a sensitivity editor? Did you use one of those for some of those? Or,
Um,
well, I should say, is Love in Time of Hate, is it to that part yet? And if it isn't, will you be using something like that, or uh, any of your other books?
I think going forward, perhaps I should. I hadn't considered it, and Circle did not suggest it. And the book is just a few months from coming out now, so I think we're past the point of it. I did share it around with some different people to get their feedback and feeling on the sensitivity, but um, it is probably something moving forward that if certainly if I'm going to write in that vein that I should
Mhm.
partake in.
Do you use other beta readers, friends, family, or um, people that you know who have technical expertise in some of the more technical aspects of your books?
Um, I in technical expertise, I will talk to people, but I don't necessarily use, you know, like my policeman friend for as a beta reader, but I will ask him things
Mhm,
and whatnot to, try and get it right. And I do have beta readers, just maybe they don't have any technical aspects to them, but my father and my mother and my wife and several other people,
mhm.
uh, I will run it through and get their feedback on it. And then, I write it and I do my own edits off of their feedback. And then I bring it to my editor who does 3 more passes on it before sending it to the publisher and their editor.
Mhm. Who came up with the covers? Was it your idea, or was it in circles, or was it a combination of the
Uh,
two?
at Encircle, one newly an owner, part owner in the business, is a wonderful woman named Deidre Waite, who has made all of my covers so far and does a fantastic job. But one of the beauties of a smaller publisher, as I've come to understand it, is I have a say in these things. I
Mhm,
can have a conversation with the cover artist and say, this is what I'm thinking. And she says, well, how about this? And we go back and forth. And then she comes, puts it together and presents it to me. And, I like it or I want to add something or whatnot. And she works with me so that, her artistic vision is realized, but my ideal of what it should look like is also realized.
Now, audiobooks, do you have any interest in, or does Encircle have any interest in having any or all of your series in audiobook form?
Um, and Circle has recently signed a contract with Find a Way Orange Sky audiobooks, who have taken, I believe, 10 titles. And so my first book, Mainly Power, or my first mystery, Mainly Power, is now in audiobook and has been for a couple months now, or just over a month, I guess.
Did you get to choose the narrator, or was it something that they already have picked
Um,
out?
they gave me a they gave me a choice of 2 people, so I was able to choose between two. They had two that they thought were be appropriate for mine, and then I was able to select, which seems to have worked out. I
Mhm.
like very much what he did with it, and I thought he did an excellent job.
If you could have any actor or actress, well, let me ask this: would you prefer having more than one person narrate it, or was just one person narrating it good? Because there's some where audiobooks that I've listened to have a whole cast of characters, and it's just too much. Some have one male voice, one female voice for their respective character genders, which is better. Sometimes it's been really good, and then sometimes just a single voice was good, was perfect.
Yeah, no, I think in my ideal world there would be two, a male and a female voice. Um, and but that's certainly harder to get them to put those pieces all together and make it work. So I understand that. I guess my input would be is I do not like it when a male tries too hard to do a female voice because it often sounds just wrong and it just really
Yes.
is off-putting to it. So if there was only a single narrator, I would like them to, it's okay if you soften your voice a little bit, but don't overdo it when you're trying to do a woman character. Or,
Mhm.
and I have listened to some that were pretty terrible in, in doing that.
You know, so if you could have any famous actor or actress narrate the books for you, who would it be?
Well, I guess certainly in the Mainly Mystery series, as I suggested that Gough Langdon may or may not be Bill Pullman, I'd probably he would be an excellent choice for it, to narrate it, or perhaps play Gough Langdon in a movie.
Well, that was going to be the next question. And everybody has said, "Oh no, I wouldn't want to see it in the movie or on the big screen." What would you want? Would you want like a Star Wars type series, a big screen thing, a Netflix type thing, a mini series, or a running like Bones or Rizzoli and Isles, a TV show that goes year after year?
Um, I think that it would be pretty fantastic to be a movie, but it could also be a Netflix series or something like that. Both of my series, I think, could go either way on that. I
Mhm,
think they could be broken up into a series, or each book would probably make a good standalone movie as well. I don't know that I'd like a Rizzoli and Isles, sort of TV series. Um, I'm not too graphic in my stuff, but I don't want it cleaned up too much.
mhm.
There is a certain element of sex and violence and profanity that I think would be lost. And I don't think I overdo that, but to clean that right up might
Mhm.
be a little too much.
And would you want to have a hand in it, or would you just let them do? Okay, this is your thing. You're the screenwriters. You're the screenplay writers and directors and stuff. Have at it.
I would love to have a hand in it. I think it would be fascinating to do, but
Mm.
that's only if asked. I'm not saying that I would demand to have a hand in it. But if they said, "Hey, we'd love to have you as a consultant," then fantastic, that would be neat.
um, so actors. So it gets on the screen, some sort of screen. Would you want Bill Pullman to play the character?
I think he'd make a fantastic Gough Langdon. Looking over the computer screen, I've got a
Mhm.
picture of him on the wall there. That is, my inspiration for Gough Langdon, and it's a good look. That's kind of who I modeled it after. So I think that he would be a good one.
Now the where would you want it set? Would you want it set in like Brunswick in Maine to be really authentic, or because I guess a lot of movies are and shows are done up in Canada because of cost and things like that. But would you insist that it be done at least at some sort of sea town, seaside town?
I mean, you say words like insist, but I really have very little clout. So I don't think insist would be in my vocabulary. But if I had clout, or if, they, offered me my druthers, I would love it to be filmed in Brunswick. I think it
Mhm,
would be neat for, it to be authentic in that. Or, and I think it would be good for the town of Brunswick, and it would be a lot of fun. So,
mhm.
that would be fantastic. But I'm certainly not going to insist. Now, there is a movement to make more movies in Maine, and I think that would be a good step for the state to garner some of that business as well and take it back from Canada.
Right, right. Well, and you had mentioned it in your first um, uh, mainly book that you had that one older character who was a minor character but now becomes a major character. His secretary, I believe you said it was, Who would you want to play? Who would you want to have play her?
That is in the Clay Wolfe Port Essex
Oh,
series.
okay. All right.
But
I'm glad you could keep the series straight.
sometimes, uh, geez, I'd have to give some thought on that one. I'm not really sure. I do have clip art of her, but it's sort of, just a random woman that, fit the part of a really hard-bitten ex-heroin user who, you know, looks like she's about 65, but probably is only 40 or 45. So I don't know. Do you have any suggestions of an actress who looks 20 years older than she is?
Um, no, I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now. But um, so in the last couple minutes that we have left, what is your all-time favorite novel, any genre, um, and what are you reading now?
Um, I'll start with the second one. I'm currently reading um, a book by Kay Morris called The Transformation of Chastity James. I just started reading that and I've been enjoying that. It is also a historical, set about the same time period as my book Love in the Time of Hate. And so that's what I'm reading right now. Um, you know, I kind of talked about Elmore Leonard and Carl Hyacin books. I don't know if anyone jumps out, but those are definitely two people that had a very deep impact on me. Louis Lamour, actually, have you ever read Louis Lamour books?
Mm-mm.
He writes westerns, and he probably had 150 books that he wrote. He just kind of pushed them out one after another, but they had a huge impact on me. And it's the protagonist hero overcoming odds. Um, but then there's also you know I'm still not quite sure why, because I'm not much of a conservative Republican at all, but I love the Ayn Rand books of Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead.
I did too. I thought they were well written, first of all, and very interesting stories.
Just such
And
powerful characters,
yeah.
I never like to quite admit that one.
Yeah, I'm not conservative by any means, but I did enjoy their big books. They're long, but I actually did enjoy reading them. It made me think of a few different things as to where I stand on certain, social aspects of society and whatnot. But so yeah, we had a few of those in the store, and they actually went pretty quick. But um, your books are available through your website, through bookshop.org. Definitely, people can give us a call and we can order them. We'll have you in the store hopefully soon. We'll start planning something. Um, check out. So the next one that's coming out is
Wolf Trap comes out June 23rd, and
that's
then
right.
Love and Not Time of Hate will be out August 25th.
Yeah. So we'll definitely keep our eyes out for that. So um, call your local bookstore. They could probably get it as well. And like I said, bookshop.org. Give us a call too, and jump on your website. Do you have what's your website?
mattcost.net. So
And,
www.mattcost.net.
and do you have an email list, or do you do any of that type of?
I don't have much of an email list yet, so one of the marketing ideas starts Monday morning on building that email list. I'm going to do some audiobook giveaways in an effort to gain more email list people. So that is next up on the docket, is to grow that and maybe put out a you know twice a year newsletter on information of what's going on with my books.
Social media?
you know Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So
All right,
I'm out there.
you're out there. All right. Well, thank you very much for being a part of our series. And like I said, we'll as soon as things start calming down, we'll definitely be in touch and have you stop by the store.
Oh, thanks for having me, Chris, and thanks for what you're doing. I mean, it's just really incredible that you're taking so many nights, you know, to connect writers and readers and, have a discussion about all of that. And it's kind of a pretty fantastic thing you're doing. So thank you and congratulations.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you very much. So thank you everybody who joined us here on Zoom and over on Facebook there. And I hope everybody has a good night. Stay safe.